Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 198, cover dated October 1985. And the cover here is penciled, inked and coloured by Barry Windsor-Smith. And unusual for the time, there is a trumpeting of the creative team there in the bottom right hand corner of the cover, Claremont and Windsor-Smith. So this story is a sort of sequel to Life Death Part 1, Uncanny X-Men 186, a video of which there is on the channel. And it picks up from the thematics of that issue, with Storm trying to come to terms with the loss of her mutant powers. So in previous issues of Uncanny X-Men, starting with 193, Storm had left the X-Men, and in issues 196, she shows up in the Serengeti in Tanzania, and she happens upon a lion hunt, one of the hunters being Baron von Strucker's grandson, who shoots a lion but also grazes Storm with a bullet and leaves her for dead on the Serengeti plain. So in issue 197, readers see Storm surrounded by, or attended by a vulture on the plain, and we're wondering what's going to become of her. And then with 198, this issue features solely on Storm, 23 pages of story inside the cover, and it opens with dialogue and captions by Chris Claremont. The desert, East Africa. So we don't know exactly where she is. She has been moving from her original location in the Serengeti, which is in Tanzania. Storm's country of origin is Kenya, also in East Africa. But I have a question mark about where she ends up in this issue, whether it's back in Kenya or whether it's farther north, but also still in the east of Africa, Ethiopia. So I'll say a little bit more about that in due course. So the opening caption script recalls the opening of Uncanny X-Men 186. Once upon a time, there was a woman who could fly. Those are the exact opening words of 186. And subsequent script here, now I walk just like plain folks in Ororo's inner monologue, also echoes phrases from 186. So the full creative team here, Chris Claremont and Barry Windsor-Smith, credited with producing the issue. So that indicates that they're co-plotting the story. Windsor-Smith is responsible, just as on the cover, in respect of the interior art, penciling, inking himself, and colouring the work. Tom Orzechowski is the letterer, and Ann Nocenti the editor. Okay. So over the page, and we have our story beginning proper. So Storm is walking through a desert storm. No doubt symbolic of the situation she finds herself in at this point in her life, injured, without her mutant powers, back home in East Africa, but wandering, lost, without a purpose, without meaning in her life, having left the X-Men, her former surrogate type family. So she cries out to the goddess that she serves, and the storm stops, and she thinks it might be an indication of the return of her mutant powers, and so she attempts to fly but falls down one of these giant sand dunes in the desert. And then she begins to hallucinate, and the first person she sees is Forge, her possible love, but someone that she also hates because he's the one who's responsible for building the gun fired by Peter Gyrick, which removed her mutant powers seemingly permanently. So here in this panel here, she says, "I'm so glad you came to save me. I've missed you so, my love." But over the panel, she repudiates him, saying, "You betrayed me, you lied to me," and so on and so forth. So repeating some of her accusations and criticisms of Forge from the end of issue 186. Then what happens is, as she picks up her walking staff and attempts to move on, she's attacked by a desert pit viper, and she battles with it. She's unsure whether she was bitten by the viper or not, and she retreats into a cave where she says, "At least there I can die in relative peace and quiet." So in the cave, her hallucinations continue, and it's interesting to note her kind of adopting a type of sitting fetal position, which recalls the position that Windsor-Smith illustrated her in at the opening of Life Death Part 1 in issue 186. So there's visual motifs carrying over to this issue 2. And then we have this panel of the X-Men that she's hallucinating. So the team of the minute, of the time rather. And it also interestingly includes Phoenix. So around this time, there were dictates emanating from editorial that the original Phoenix, Jean Grey, should return from the dead. And Claremont was not party to that, was quite angry about it. The story goes that he got news of it late one Friday evening and was so angry that he was prepared to quit. But roll around Monday morning, he'd reflected somewhat on things and his temper had cooled, and he decided against quitting. So in any case, in this hallucination sequence, Jean and Storm talk to each other, where Aurora feels that she failed Jean, that she couldn't help save her. Back at the climax of the seminal Dark Phoenix saga, and Jean replies that it wasn't her fault, that knowing all that happened, she'd still have taken on the mantle of Phoenix and gone through everything that she went through. Also present is Wolverine, and Wolverine unsheathes his claws, sheathes them again, and hugs Storm, telling her that if she wishes, he'll unleash his claws into her and put her out of her misery. No more pain, no more fear, he says. But she rejects that, says she's not afraid. And then she turns on Professor X, who says he wouldn't blame her if she stayed in the cave. And she says no, but then she regrets their disappearance and wishes for them to come back. And after a while, time passes and her eyes open and she emerges from the cave. The pit viper's still there waiting for her, but this time she doesn't struggle against it, and it slithers away without biting her. And then she makes her way with the aid of her walking staff and comes across a bus that crashed in the midst, presumably, of the desert storm, and finds a lone survivor who is this young, heavily pregnant woman, Shani. And Shani tells her the story of what happened. There are no survivors in the wreck, and so Storm picks up Shani, helps her to her feet, and the two of them Shani, wrapped in Storm's cloak, walk away from the wreck. And we're told in the interior monologue that because you'd think, well, surely there must be something in the bus wreckage that they could use. No, she found nothing of use in the wreckage. So they walk away. And they decide to make their way back to Shani's village. She's very worried about what the villagers and her parents will make of her, having left the village in search of a new life in the big city. She's returning to them pregnant and with nothing else to show for her time away from the village, and she's wondering what judgment her parents will make of her. This is fantastic page here with the vertical panels, the amount of detail here by Windsor-Smith, illustrating what is a quiet scene, really showing us the immensity of the desert and the puniness of their fire, which they need to keep warm in the coldness of the desert at night, and sharing body heat to keep warm too. So as they get closer to the village, they find these huge abandoned agricultural vehicles of various kinds, and Storm asks Shani about them, and then she gets the story that there was arable soil, or rather she discovers it for herself. There was arable soil here, farmland, not so long ago, yet now it is barren and desolate, like the moon. So we're going to get the story of what happened in relation to those big machines later from the village elder. This chap here, Mjar, I'm going to pronounce it Mijnari, Mjnari, Mijnari. I'll go with that pronunciation. So he comes out to greet the two, Ororo and Shani. And Shani was wondering about what her reception would be, but she's welcomed. As he says, they're welcome. So her parents hug her. And Storm, from her injury, from her time in the desert, we're not sure how long she was out in the desert. And again, we don't know exactly where this village is exhausted and drops to the ground unconscious. So then time passes, and she wakes up, and the village elder, Nari, reveals that she's been out for a few days. And now they have need of her again because Shani is giving birth to her son, but it's a difficult birth, and they need Ororo's assistance. Ororo has had some medical training, even though she's not a professional midwife, of course, but she goes to Shani and helps her with the birth process. So we have that illustrated here in this page. Notice no words. Claremont knows when to back off and let the pictures do the talking here. So we have a blended scene of the village men dancing around the fire in some kind of ritual dance to help Shani with her childbirth, and we have Storm helping too. An interesting use of vertical panels here, narrow panels for the dance, wider panels featuring Storm and Shani. Perhaps I was thinking reflecting the rhythm of Shani's birth contractions, perhaps. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Okay. And then, of course, the child is born, a son, but he's not breathing. There's panic about this, and Ororo, who has been wondering so much in this issue and previous ones about the value of life, gives mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to the baby. We're all wondering what is going to be the outcome, and the baby cries out, and so everyone outside realizes that the boy child lives. So Shani, Storm presents the baby to Shani, and all is well there. But Mijnari leaves and says, "There is a last duty I must perform." And this is a very interesting symbolic ending to the story, where Mighnari disrobes himself, he divests himself of his status as village elder, and walks out into the desert, up onto this stony hilltop. And Ororo follows after him, asking, "What is the meaning of this? Where are you going?" And he says to her, "I think you know, because I must." So he climbs to the top of the stony hilltop. Down here we see those abandoned agricultural vehicles, and he tells us what has happened to the village and the surrounding area. How modern people came, taught them how to work the land with modern technology, how the land then was overworked, how the people lost touch with their traditional agricultural methods, and how with the land overworked it became desert once again, and the people had to return to their traditional agricultural methods, and how that is the reason that they're surviving now, and how there isn't room for any additional members of the village. So when one new member arrives, Shani's child, the oldest must give way, and that's what he's doing, going onto the hilltop to will himself to die, to make room for the child. So Ororo doesn't agree with him, doesn't understand, but is ultimately won around by his argument. And this is just fantastic illustration by Barry Windsor-Smith. The drawing, the draftsmanship, the use of color here, tremendous work, stunning work. Really, I'm not the only one to think this, but it would just be tremendous to see an artist edition with Windsor-Smith's Marvel work from this period, including these issues of the X-Men, because around this time, 84, 85, and up to the Weapon X work, he was producing some stunning work for Marvel, just stunning. And so Mighnari is certain that it's a good way to die, making way for new life, Shani's child. And Storm says, "I shall mourn the passing of a friend I hardly knew." But then we get this tremendous climax where Mighnari is dead, but Storm continues to hear him talking to her. And he says, "Somewhere on these plains it is said that countless ages ago the human race began." And that is current theory, that the human species, the modern human species, Homo sapiens, began or evolved in East Africa. And he continues saying how two great cultures crash headlong into each other, the very old against the very new. The one must give way to the other, for that is nature's way. But at the same time, its wisdom and experience must teach, lest youth and immaturity bring about unwitting catastrophe. Technology is not inherently evil, merely the careless, stupid use of it. Neither tradition is wholly good if it blinds us to ways of making our lives better and happier. A bridge is needed between these two halves of the world, a synthesis, a blend. A person who is both one and the other, whose mind comprehends and whose hands command the machines, yet whose eyes and soul look upon them with the wisdom of the ages. And Storm realizes that he's talking about her, whether it is his voice or her sense of him and what he would say now that he's passed on. But she realizes she has an inspiration, she has a moment of epiphany, and determines not to crawl back to the cave, flee from duty and responsibility. It's too easily done, and it's a path she's already walked. She thinks to herself, but if I truly crave that oblivion, I would have let Wolverine kill me in the cave, or will myself to death as Mjnari did on this hilltop. I have found my home. It is the whole of the world, and with it, the reason for my being. I have no powers, my body cannot fly, but I no longer mind, for in my heart and soul, where it truly matters, I soar higher than the stars. So a stunning final full-page illustration of Storm having worked through her life-death issues and coming to this conclusion that she will be the bridge between Homo sapiens and Homo superior. And there was a plan that Claremont and Windsor-Smith would continue and round out this storyline of Storm with a third chapter of Life-Death, but Marvel Editorial did not approve it for publication, so Windsor-Smith took those pages, reworked them and self-published them, and you can find them with the title. I think the character was called Ad Astra, which means to the stars in Latin, and so that in effect is the like a clue to how the trilogy would have rounded out in respect of Windsor-Smith's plotting. But it's not the end of Windsor-Smith and Claremont's collaboration, because there are 2 more issues of that on X-Men. And up next for review and commentary will be Uncanny X-Men 205 featuring Wolverine. One last thing I want to say, I mentioned it earlier, is where this takes place, because this issue would have been produced by Claremont and Windsor-Smith in the earlier part of 1985, and that would have been still in the period of the dreadful famine in Ethiopia, which lasted from 1983 to 1985. And there's mention in here of war also being one of the factors in the poverty and baseline survival level of those in the village. And the only place that there had been a recent war was Ethiopia, between Ethiopia and Eritrea. So that's what makes me wonder whether Storm walked all the way from northern Tanzania through Kenya up to Ethiopia, which would still keep her in East Africa, yes? So I don't know what you think about that. If you've any ideas yourself, let me know in the comments. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like the video. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more content like this.